Good morning. So, about 10 years ago, I used to work at a camp. It was a Christian camp ministry, and it was over in South Jersey. And they took some old cranberry bogs and converted the whole territory into the camp. And so there are three main lakes. But the best part that I kind of remember is not only meeting some wonderful friends, but I used to carry a staff around with me. And it was so fun to actually walk like that. Not because I was trying to be like Moses, but in reality because it was really easy to hold the staff out and then shepherd all these teenage boys and girls that were in my program. And so sometimes I often felt like a shepherd. And we would often talk about this passage while walking on the way to the cafeteria, while walking out to the field where we would play games, while walking out to wherever the bonfire was that night. And in the midst of these conversations, we would talk about sheep. We would talk about shepherds, of course. But you know what? We had some misunderstandings about this chapter. And some of these are kind of common mistakes that we make about John chapter 10. So I'm just going to run down a few of them so that we can help understand this passage as it is, but then also what does it still mean for us? Okay. So first off, this is John's gospel, which is the last of the four gospels written. But in John chapter 10, Jesus is actually slightly alluding to the fact that he is God. Because way back in Ezekiel 34, God makes some very strong statements about the bad shepherds of that day, of Ezekiel's day, and says, one day I will come and be your good shepherd. So here's Jesus alluding back to Ezekiel 34. It's quite profound. If you want some really interesting stuff, go back and read Ezekiel 34. You might have your jaw dropped by how impressively it connects with John chapter 10. Okay. However, there's a thief in this story, or in Jesus' comments here. There's comments about the good shepherd. Jesus tells about how he is the good shepherd and a door. So there's something interesting happening there. Well, it kind of goes like this. We often read that passage where it says that the thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. And a common mistake would be to apply that to the devil. However, maybe in context, we could say it's actually the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the ones that come to steal maybe the resources of their people. Maybe some of their actions are quite lethal, and it just destroys their people. What's really interesting is that in this chapter, Jesus compares himself as the good shepherd to the thieves that are the Pharisees. So on this side, we have Jesus, who is the good shepherd. He is the Christ who is being known by his fruit, and his fruit are that people have life and they have it abundantly. They have a life that exceeds beyond the limit. It overflows. It's bubbling up all the time. It's constantly growing in its expansiveness and beauty and vitality. Like, oh my gosh. However, that's in contrast to the thieves, who are probably the Pharisees, and their activity is actually diminishing people's lives rather than raising them up. And so we have here an either or. Jesus kind of does that often. He sets up an either or statement that leaves us asking, do we want the life of the good shepherd, or do we want something like the other thing? And so Jesus is always preaching about himself, because Jesus is both the messenger and the message. Jesus is the good news. Okay. Now, this passage where it says that Jesus calls himself the shepherd and the door, I was like, what does that mean? What does that mean that you're the door, or what? Well, a few years ago, I was over in Scotland, and I was in the Scottish Highlands, and there's rolling green hills, and in the distance you can see a few mountains, but they're more just rolling hills. Just lush and green because it's always raining there. But my brother and I and my aunt and our other friend, we went and visited, I think it was Lindisfarne Castle. And Lindisfarne is a beautiful little stretch of land that gets cut off when the tide rises. The water separates, and so you actually can only drive to the castle during certain hours of the day. And if you don't get off in time, you're going to be stuck there for another 12 hours until the next tide comes through. But we were there, and my goodness, we were surrounded by hundreds of sheep. And that was pretty wild. I don't know if you've ever stood in the midst of 100 of animals that are not humans. Like, obviously we've been in cities, but sheep are really interesting. And while we were there, my brother and I were talking about this passage, John chapter 10. And in that region, at least, there's not a whole lot of trees. And so often there's walls built out of stone. And sometimes this can happen in Middle Eastern culture as well. What they would do, the shepherds, is they would actually line stones up like a wall in a circle, or sometimes they would have it in like a corner of a space, and then they'd have like a corner wall, but there'd be a gap between, because they didn't have wood all the time to make a gate. And get this, the shepherd would lay down across the opening of the stone corral. And so the shepherd was literally the shepherd and the door, who voluntarily lays his life down for the sheep. My goodness, that's amazing. That preaches, right? So Jesus comes along, and he compares and contrasts himself with the thieves, the Pharisees, who are setting themselves up as being good religious leaders, but they're actually diminishing people's lives. And Jesus says, I would lay my life down across the opening. I am the gate to this pasture. Nothing is going to sneak over me. No wolf is going to get past me. I am the gate. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. So what we have here is Jesus. Well, my goodness, in the next 2 chapters, the Pharisees start to decide that they need to take Jesus out. They decide, okay, he raises Lazarus in chapter 12, and then chapter 11, and then they decide to kill him, as well as Lazarus. So what can we take from this? I think what the Spirit has to say today is that we are always presented with an option, an either or. Every moment, will we listen to the voice of the good shepherd, or will we listen to the voices of the thieves? Will we trust the good shepherd when he lays his life down for us, or will we live in constant fear of thieves and wolves? Because my understanding is that Jesus always invites us to listen to he who is the good shepherd. Jesus always invites us to trust and to hope and to love rather than fear and all of the rest. So this week, may you cultivate something within you that notices when the good shepherd is speaking to you. May you come to recognize his voice with your own ears, and may you come to realize that anything that stirs you in fear, anger, or shame are the things that diminish your life rather than help you to have it abundantly. So listen to the voice of the good shepherd whenever and wherever it comes from. Amen.